we're going to start our next lecture of managerial economics, that is about game theory. Before that, we have finished the concept of oligopoly, and this game theory and oligopoly, these are related. And in oligopoly, we have discussed that how it is applicable in the markets. And then we have also discussed about the duopoly. Previous lecture was about the duopoly and oligopoly. So today our topic of discussion is game theory. So first of all, I will tell you that the game theory has been applied to context in war, business and biology. And it is the branch of mathematics that concerned with the analysis of strategies for dealing with competitive situations, where the outcome of the particular choice of action depends critically on the action of other participant. So game theory is widely regarded as having its origin in the mid 19th century with publication in 1838 of Augustin Cournot researchers into the mathematical principles of the theory of wealth, in which he attempted to explain the underlying rules governing the behavior of duopolists. And it was with the publication in 1944 of John von Neumann and Oskar, The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, that the modern principles of game theory were formulated. Game theory has been widely applied to the behavior of producers with a few or only one competitor. So, in game theory, we are actually observing the behavior of participants, that the behavior of one person is affecting on the behavior of other. And the game theory consists of players, strategies, payoffs. It might also involve some form of pre-commitment. Players means one or two players. You are talking about two players here. How many strategies they have, whether they are getting the profit or not. Profits are like the payoffs. And the game theory and oligopoly is related, and oligopoly theory often makes heavy use of game theory to model the actual behavior of businesses in concentrated markets. As we have discussed in oligopoly markets, that few sellers have control over the market, and it is concentrated more on the elite producers. There are different games we will study one by one. First of all, I will tell you about simultaneous games. There are two types of games, that simultaneous games and sequential. First of all, we're going to start the simultaneous games. It means the players effectively make decisions at the same time, but the one player had no idea about the choice of other player whenever they make the choices. And the first and the important example of the type of game is the prisoner's dilemma. And this is applicable on the other games also, which are a game of rock, paper, scissors, penalty shootouts in social matches, speed dating, close bid auctions, athletes choosing to dog or not to dog. So it means this game will be applicable where one player had no idea about the choice of other player. The economic application of game theory can be valuable tool in the fundamental analysis of industries, sectors, and any strategic interaction between two or more firms. And here I have discussed the game that has consist on the four actions. First of all, the game is actually any set of circumstances that has a result dependent on the action of two or more decision makers. That is the game. And player is actually a strategic decision maker within the context of game. And strategy mean whenever any person plays a game, he makes some strategy. Any game has some players and they make some strategies. A complete plan or action player will take given the set of circumstances that might arise within the game. And third is the payoff. The payoff a player receives from arriving at particular outcome, and that outcome may be in the form of rupee, dollars, etc. Means if you will win the game, you will get some benefit. And it has also some information set. The information set or the information available at a given point in the game. The term information set is most usually applied when the game has a sequential component. Here we are talking about, first of all, simultaneous games. So we are discussing about the behavior of simultaneous games, and first of all we're going to start the prisoner's dilemma. And that the prisoner's dilemma concept has been used in 1950 by Canadian mathematician Albert W. Tucker when providing a simple example of game theory. In case of prisoner's dilemma, this is the story about two prisoners. They are being questioned over their guilt or innocence of a crime, and they have a simple choice either to confess to the crime and accept the consequences, or to deny all involvement and hope that their partner does likewise. As you know that we are talking that this is the form of simultaneous games where one player don't know the move of other player, and here we are discussing the prisoner's dilemma. Means there are two people who have committed a crime, and they have the choices whether to confess or to stay keep quiet, and they will accept the consequences. Confess or keep quiet. The prisoner's dilemma is a classic example of basic game theory in action. And whenever they will confess or keep quiet, they will get some return, positive or negative. This is payoff in this game that is measured in terms of years in prison arising from their choices. And you know that no one knows the decision of other player, and here the both prisoners they have thrown to the jail independently, and no communication is permitted between them, and they will make the independent decisions, and here there will be uncertainty. For example, there are two robbers who have robbed a bank and went to do it. The plan went wrong and get caught, and then both were kept in separate jail to avoid interaction. Each of them provided with same set of offers, whether to confess or not confess, whether to confess or remain silent. Confess means they will accept that they make the robbery, or otherwise they will remain silent. But here, this is very interesting game. You can see here, this is the prisoner A, and here it is prisoner B. Prisoner A have two choices, confess or remain silent. Prisoner B will also have two choices, whether to confess or remain silent. Whenever the prisoner A will confess, means he is clear about his decision, he is confessing. Then he don't know, or he doesn't know about the choice of prisoner B. So he is thinking that prisoner B can confess and he can remain silent also. So whenever the prisoner A is making the decision of confess, so prisoner B maybe confess or maybe remain silent. So here, whenever A will confess and B will also confess, so it means both have accepted. So both will go to jail for 5 years. And when the first will confess and second will remain silent, means the first has confessed that both have done the crime, and second did not tell to the police that whether he has done or not. So it means the prisoner A, he will thrown out of the jail, and the prisoner B will get the extra punishment because he remains silent. So whenever the prisoner A will remain silent, prisoner B also have two choices, confess or remain silent. You have to make sure that this is the first payoff. This is the first payoff, that is left hand side. This is showing the payoff of prisoner A, and second is showing about the prisoner B. Whenever the prisoner A remains silent, the prisoner B may be confess or remain silent. If he remains silent and he confess, so it means the prisoner A will get more punishment, and prisoner B, he will not be more in the jail. And when both will remain silent and they caught, so the police will give them one year punishment. So here you can see that this is the game that every player have the same choices. Both have set some offers, same set of offers, that prisoner A will confess or remain silent, prisoner B will confess or remain silent. And now we'll see that what is the dominance strategy of both. First of all, the dominant strategy is the thing I prefer keeping other person's view in mind. Means I will not change my decision what the other people will think. And here it is showing that this first confess is the option which is showing the dominance strategy. As here you can see, whenever I will confess, he may confess or remain silent. You can see here, when I will confess, he has the two options, confess or remain silent. If he will confess, so he will get 5 years jail, and he will remain silent, he will get 20 years jail. So I will confess here and he will also confess here. Why he will confess here? Because he will get here the less punishment. And in second case, if I will remain silent, whether the B will confess or remain silent. So here, in this case, when I will remain silent, the prisoner B will also confess, and he will not remain silent. Whenever I have the option of remain silent, so B have the option of confess or remain silent. So here he will confess. You can see that the prisoner B, in the both cases, he will confess. So the confess is the dominant strategy of prisoner B. Now you can see that if the prisoner B will confess, the prisoner A will confess or remain silent. If the prisoner A will confess, he will get 5 years. If he will remain silent, he will get 20 years jail, so he will confess. If prisoner B will remain silent, he has two options, whether to confess or whether to go to jail, so he will confess. It means confess is the strategy for player A and B. This is called the dominance strategy for both of the players. Now, what is the Nash equilibrium? If no player can do better by unilaterally changing his strategy, then such a set of strategies is Nash equilibrium. I don't want to change my strategy when your strategy. So here, this is also called Nash equilibrium. Whatever the other person will do, I will also confess. I don't want to change my strategy given your strategy, so I am not changing my strategy. Means in all the cases I will confess only, so I will not change my strategy, and same in case of prisoner B, that he will also not change his strategy. Now in case of prisoner's dilemma, what is the best strategy for each prisoner? And here they're saying that confess is the best strategy for each player, that is called dominant strategy. And here the applying the prisoner's dilemma to business decisions, game theory examples revolve around the payoff that come from making different decisions. In the prisoner's dilemma, the reward to defecting is greater than mutual cooperation, which itself brings a higher reward than mutual defection. Critically, the reward for two players cooperating with each other is higher than the average reward from defection and the sucker's payoff. It means whenever you see this case, whenever both will confess, they will go to jail for 5 years, and if they will not confess or remain silent, so they get the higher punishment. So you can see the intuition behind the prisoner's dilemma.
Hey, how you doing, Econ students? This is Mr. Clifford. Welcome to Econ Movies. Today we're going to look at the economics in Batman. No, wait. We're going to look at The Dark Knight.
Oh, you want to play?
This movie actually has some great economic advice.
If you're good at something, never do it for free.
Now we're still talking about microeconomics, and this time we're going to talk about oligopolies. An oligopoly is when an industry is controlled by a few large producers. For example, the wireless cell phone market in the United States is controlled by four main firms: Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile. Competition between these firms keeps prices down, but what if they got together to set prices high so they could all make more profit? This is called collusion. Now this is illegal in the United States, and so there's two words to describe collusion:
Unethical, dangerous.
Firms in an oligopoly are interdependent. This means that their decisions will directly affect their competitors, so they have to be aware of how their competitors will respond. So to maximize profit, these firms have to use game theory, which is the study of strategy. This movie includes a great but rather violent example of game theory.
Tonight you're all going to be a part of a social experiment. I'm ready right now to blow you all sky high. If anyone attempts to get off their boat, you all die. Each of you has a remote. Blow up the other boat. If, however, one of you presses the button, I'll let that boat live. So, who's it gonna be?
Just in case you haven't seen the movie, spoiler alert. Let's talk about the classic example of game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. Assume two people were arrested, charged with a crime, and put in two different cells.
Oh, my head. Oh, everything's fuzzy. Ow! Who punches a hand?
Prisoner 1 and prisoner 2 have only two choices. They can either deny or they can confess to the crime. This means that there's only four possible outcomes that can occur. If they both deny, there's enough evidence to put them in jail for 10 years each. When reading these things, the numbers on the left are prisoner 1 and the numbers on the right are prisoner 2. I color-coded them to help you better see this. If they both confess to the crime, they're both going to go to jail for 20 years. But if prisoner 1 confesses and prisoner 2 denies, prisoner 1 is basically going to rat out prisoner 2. And so prisoner 1 is going to go free, and prisoner 2 is going to go to jail for 30 years. Now over here, if prisoner 1 denies and prisoner 2 confesses, prisoner 2 goes home free, and prisoner 1 goes to jail for 30 years. So what are they going to choose? Well, that's the point of game theory. Before you can make a choice, you have to keep in mind what the other person's going to do. Now this is a good way to introduce the idea of game theory, but let's look at a better example that has firms and profits. As you probably know, Batman started as a comic book character. What you might not know is that the comic book industry today is an oligopoly. Marvel Comics has about 37% market shares, and DC Comics, the creators of Batman, have about 31% market shares. Like most oligopolies, the end product is sometimes very similar because they're trying to find what customers want and they steal ideas from each other. So think of the story of Batman. A handsome billionaire that drives fast cars and hangs out with beautiful women has a life-changing experience that inspires him to fight evil despite having no superpowers, so instead he has to rely on gadgets and a special suit to fight terrorists. Aided by his trusted butler, he is betrayed by a mentor, defeats a bunch of bad guys, and becomes a beloved hero. This story sounds familiar. Anyways, Since the comic book industry is an oligopoly and is controlled by a few large firms, they have to use game theory. So let's say that DC Comics and Marvel Comics are deciding whether or not they should make a new comic book series covering the backstories of famous butlers or villains. DC is deciding whether they should have a series about Alfred or a series about Joker.
A long time ago, I was in Burma. My friends and I were working for the local government. They were trying to buy the loyalty of tribal leaders by bribing them with precious stones.
Marvel is deciding between making a comic book about Jarvis or the Mandarin. Assume each company can make either one or the other, and so the result is this game theory matrix. This shows the profit that each firm would get in each of these different situations. Let's just keep it simple by having really low numbers. To verify that you know how to read this thing, let me ask you a quick question. If DC decides to make a comic book about Alfred, and Marvel does one about the Mandarin, how much profit will Marvel get? The answer is $200. Now that you can read the chart, let's talk about something called a dominant strategy. If you have a dominant strategy, that means you should make that choice no matter what. In other words, it doesn't matter what the other person does, you should definitely choose that option. So let's see if DC has a dominant strategy. Now, if Marvel decides to go with Jarvis, DC can choose between doing Alfred and getting $100 or going with Joker and getting $500. Which one would DC rather have? Well, they'd rather have $500, and so they're going to do a comic book about the Joker. If Marvel chooses the Mandarin, again, DC would choose to do a comic book about the Joker. That means that that option is their dominant strategy. With these numbers, there's no reason for them ever to make a comic book about Alfred. Sorry, Alfred. Now let's see if Marvel has a dominant strategy. If DC chooses Alfred, Marvel can choose between doing a comic book about Jarvis and getting $300, or doing one about Mandarin and getting $200. Marvel would choose Jarvis. If DC chooses the Joker, Marvel can choose between doing Jarvis and getting $50, or doing a comic book about the Mandarin and getting $300. They would choose the Mandarin. So depending on what DC chooses, Marvel might choose Jarvis, or they might choose the Mandarin. This means they do not have a dominant strategy. Now, if this was realistic and the firms did have all this perfect information, where would the firms end up? Well, DC would obviously choose the Joker because that's their dominant strategy, and Marvel would choose to do the Mandarin because that will give them the most profit. This is the idea of something called a Nash equilibrium. It's the end result that we'll be at when each firm makes choices to maximize their own profit, but also keeps in mind what the other firm is going to do. Reading a game theory matrix and finding the different dominant strategies will take time and practice, so be patient. Dominant strategies are not that hard to find. Where are they? Seriously, just calm down, look at the game theory matrix, and you'll figure it out. Where are they? Seriously, dude, just relax.
We are going to pull off the true crime of the century. We are going to steal...
So here we have discussed about the dominant strategy and about the Nash equilibrium. In case of prisoner's dilemma, the Nash equilibrium will be the same of like the dominant strategy because confessing is the Nash equilibrium. It's the best outcome taking into account the likely actions of others. Now, what is actually the Nash equilibrium? First of all, it was given the idea by the John Nash. And this is an important idea in the game theory. It describes a situation where all of the players in a game are pursuing their best possible strategy given the strategy of all of the other players or the participants. And here in Nash equilibrium, it is a solution to a game involving two or more players. It means when Nash equilibrium is reached, players cannot improve their payoffs by independently changing their strategy. This means that is the best strategy, assuming the other has chosen a strategy and will not change it, like you have done in the dominant strategy. Whether the other person will confess or not, you will always confess. Whether the person A will confess or not, the prisoner B will always confess. So this was the condition of Nash equilibrium. For example, you're taking the this example of firm A and firm B. Both have the same options, high prices and low prices. In the two firm game, they have to decide whether to set high or low prices. So this is showing the table of payoffs. Whenever the firm A will choose the high prices, firm B have the option to choose the high prices or low prices. Whenever they choose the high prices, it is 3 billion, and whenever they have the option of this is the uh, so here this is the 5 billion. He is getting the more payoff, in this case 5 billion. So it means whenever the firm will choose the option of low prices, the firm B has two options, whether 0 billion or 1 billion. So he will choose 1 billion. In both cases, he will choose the low prices. So you can say this is the dominant strategy. And here, whenever the firm B will choose the higher prices, firm A has the two options of higher prices or low prices. So it means he will choose the 5 billion. And whenever the firm B will choose the low prices, the firm A has also two options, high prices or low prices. So he will choose the again low prices. So it means the firm A also have the dominant strategy of the low prices. Both will choose the low prices here, and may settle, both they may settle at the low prices. So in both the case, they have the dominant strategy of the low prices. So you can see here, whenever the firm A will he is going to choose the higher prices, he has the two options. Okay, whenever they have incentives to collude, it means we have the two options, collude or not, or making the competition. What is the collusion? Collusion, it means they are making the competition, or they are not they are not making the collusion. So here are the applications of the game theory, which are on the decision on research and development, marketing budgets, new product launches, output decisions. And this is the basically in price wars in concentrated markets. What is price war? It means the behavior of one firm is interdependent on the behavior of other. If one firm will charge the high price, the other will charge also the high price, or there will be the price war, or they will cut the price. If the one firm will lower the price, other firm will also lower the price. Here are some applications of the game theory, and this is the best example of the game theory here. It is oligopoly, and a simple cost plus pricing method which is shared by all participants. And supermarket can be the best example, implicitly agreeing some lines where price cutting will take place, such as bread or baked beans, but keeping price constant for most lines. Price can be constant, price can be stable in oligopoly also. And Apple and Samsung involved in a game of advertising, as both firms have a stable market reputation. The advertising costs are direct drain on the net corporate profits. As the game theory, we are discussing the concept of oligopoly, and the market is concentrated among the few sellers. And we are taking the example of Apple and Samsung. They can all, whenever they will collude, they can also make the monopoly, and they can get the higher profit. And here another example that we see in everyday life related to public goods. If all the residents of a society decides to become good citizens and decide not to throw trash in the open, the society benefits as a whole. Even the property rates might go up. But an individual might behave in a rogue way or in a selfish way by throwing trash in the open. The cost of cleaning is borne by the whole society. So this is the problem of free rider and tragedy of commons. It means someone is throwing the trash and the cost is bearing by the whole society.
When you're hanging out with your friends, you probably don't think too hard about the math behind the decisions you're making. But there is a whole field of math and science that applies to social interactions. It's called game theory. Game theory was pioneered in the 1950s by mathematician John Nash, the guy that Russell Crowe played in A Beautiful Mind. But game theory isn't about games the way we normally think about them. Instead, a game is any interaction between multiple people in which each person's payoff is affected by the decisions made by others. So sure, that could apply to a game of poker, but it could also apply to practically any situation where people get together and get up in each other's business. Like, did you interact with anyone today? Well, you can probably analyze the decisions you made using game theory. Game theory is incredibly wide-ranging, and it's used all the time by economists, political scientists, biologists, military tacticians, and psychologists, just to name a few. Game theory has two main branches: cooperative and non-cooperative or competitive game theory. Non-cooperative game theory covers competitive social interactions where there will be some winners and some losers. Probably the most famous thought experiment in competitive game theory is the prisoner's dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma describes a game, a social interaction, that involves two prisoners. We'll call them Wanda and Fred. Wanda and Fred were arrested fleeing from the scene of a crime, and based on the evidence the police have already collected, they are going to have to spend 2 years in jail. But the DA wants more, so he offers them both a deal. If you confess to the crime and your partner does not, you will be granted immunity for cooperating. You'll be free to go. Your partner, though, will serve 10 years in jail. If you both confess and dish up loads of dirt about each other, then you will both end up spending 5 years in jail. But if neither of you confess, you will both spend only 2 years in jail. Those are their options. Then, Wanda and Fred are split up. They don't know what their partner is going to do. They have to make their decisions independently. Now, Wanda and Fred, they've had some wild times stealing diamonds or whatever, but they don't have any special loyalty to each other. They're not brother and sister. They're hardened criminals. Fred has no reason to think that Wanda won't stab him in the back and vice versa. Competitive game theory arranges their choices and their potential consequences into a grid that looks like this. If both Wanda and Fred choose not to confess, they'll both serve 2 years. In theory, this is the best overall outcome. Combined, they would spend as little time in prison as possible. But that immunity sounds pretty good. If one of them chooses to confess and the other one doesn't, the snitch gets to walk. Then the math looks like this. That's the problem. Wanda and Fred have no reason to trust each other. Wanda might consider not confessing because if Fred doesn't confess either, both only serve 2 years. If they could really trust each other, that would be their best bet. But Wanda can't be sure that Fred won't snitch. He has a lot to gain by confessing. If he does decide to confess and she keeps silent, she's risking 10 years in jail while he goes free. Compared to that, the 5 years they both get for turning on each other doesn't sound so bad. And that is game theory's solution. They should both confess and rat each other out. So right now you're thinking, wow, game theory is a jerk. But it actually makes sense. That square in the grid where they both confess is the only outcome that has reached what's known as Nash equilibrium. This is a key concept in competitive game theory. A player in a game has found Nash equilibrium when they make the choice that leaves them better off no matter what their opponents decide to do. If Wanda confesses and Fred does not confess, she's better off. She gets to walk. By confessing, she went from serving 2 years in prison to serving none. If Fred does confess, she's still better off. If she'd kept her mouth shut, she'd be spending 10 years in prison. Now, she only has to serve 5. Sure, if she decides not to confess and Fred keeps his pinky promise too, they'll both get out in 2 years, but that is an unstable state because Wanda can't trust Fred. She doesn't know what he's going to do. This is not a cooperative game. All of the players stand to gain from stabbing each other in the back. The Prisoner's Dilemma is just one example of a competitive game, but the basic idea behind its solution applies to all kinds of situations. Generally, when you're competing with others, it makes sense to choose the course of action that benefits you the most, no matter what everyone else decides to do. Then there are cooperative games, where every player has agreed to work together toward a common goal. This could be anything from a group of friends deciding how to split up the cost to pay the bill at a restaurant, to a coalition of nations deciding how to divvy up the burden of stopping climate change. In game theory, a coalition is what you call a group of players in a cooperative game. When it comes to cooperative games, game theory's main question is how much each player should contribute to the coalition and how much they should benefit from it. In other words, it tries to determine what's fair. Where competitive game theory has the Nash equilibrium, cooperative game theory has what's called the Shapley value. The Shapley value is a method of dividing up gains or costs among players according to the value of their individual contributions. It works by applying several axioms. Number one, the contribution of each player is determined by what is gained or lost by removing them from the game. This is called their marginal contribution. Let's say that every day this week you and your friends are baking cookies. When you get sick for a day, probably from eating too many cookies, the group produces 50 fewer cookies than they did on the days that you were there. So your marginal contribution to the coalition every day is 50 cookies. Number two, interchangeable players have equal value. If two parties bring the same things to the coalition, they should have to contribute the same amount and should be rewarded for their contributions equally. Like if two people order the same thing at the restaurant, they should pay the same amount of the bill. If two workers have the same skills, they should receive the same wages. Number three, dummy players have zero value. In other words, if a member of the coalition contributes nothing, then they should receive nothing. This one's controversial. It could mean that if you go to dinner with your friends but you don't order anything, then you shouldn't have to chip in when the bill comes, which seems fair in that case. But it could also mean that if somebody can't contribute to the workforce, they shouldn't receive any compensation. The thing is, there are good reasons why somebody might not be able to contribute. Maybe they're on maternity leave, or they got in an accident, or they have some kind of disability. In situations like that, the coalition might want to pay something out to them in spite of them not being able to contribute. The fourth axiom says that if a game has multiple parts, cost or payment should be decomposed across those parts. This just means that, for example, if you did a lot of work for the group on Monday but you slacked off on Tuesday, your rewards on each day should be different. Or if you ordered a salad one night but a steak dinner the next, you probably should pay more on the second night.
So here we have discussed about the dominance strategy and Nash equilibrium. In Prisoner's Dilemma, we have seen the Nash equilibrium, that is actually the person is better off and he will not change his strategy.